In 1989, a man with a blurred face said on television that the United States government had 9 alien spacecraft in its possession. Then, inexplicably, this man asked the station to remove the blur because his life was already over, essentially. This man is Bob Lazar, and if you've kept up with any of the alien UFO disclosure stuff over the last long time, since 1989, you've definitely heard his name. But just because you may know his name, I would bet that you don't know the full story. For example, by the time Bob had said this on television with his face blurred,
well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs, that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
His first wife had been dead for 3 years, and she was a convicted murderer 15 years older than him. She died of carbon monoxide poisoning in their garage 2 days before Bob bigamously married his second wife. There was no autopsy. Bob Lazar's college degree came from a school that the federal government was prosecuting as a diploma mill the year that he graduated. He'd also filed for bankruptcy, and the next year he would plead guilty to felony pandering for running a prostitution operation out of a Las Vegas apartment complex. So logically, by every standard of credibility, you should ignore the pimp fireworks salesman. The problem with ignoring him is that what he said in 1989, in 35 years, none of his claims have been fully disproved, and some of it has gotten less easy to dismiss, not more. Things have come true over time, sort of an Alex Jones situation. But enough of that. This video is about Bob Lazar. It is a video about a man that you should not believe, and about why there is a cult of people who do anyways, including, in a lot of ways, me. I believe a lot of what he says. I'm gonna go down on it. Okay, guys, I'm gonna go right down on it and give that shit a sucking. I'm gonna go right down on it and suck that shit sideways. Is that a weird way to intro a video? This starts in Las Vegas, the year of our Lord, 1989. In the spring, a man walked into a Vegas television station and told the news director that he had a story to tell. The station was KLAS, the CBS affiliate. The news director sent him to George Knapp, KLAS's chief investigative reporter who'd spent the previous decade covering organized crime in Nevada, which is very dangerous because it's kind of what Nevada was known for at the time. Knapp, in fact, had won many regional Emmys for his casino reporting and had never covered a UFO story in his life. You could say that he was a legit journalist. You could say he was very credible. The man had been introduced to Knapp through John Lear, the son of the inventor of the Learjet and a former CIA contract with a long-standing public interest in UFOs. Lear was a known figure in UFO subculture and not, on his own terms, a credible source. But he was connected, and he was the kind of person who would not have brought a stranger to a working reporter without a good reason. So the blurred man told Knapp that he'd worked at a hangar called S4 in the desert southwest of Groom Lake on what he described as 9 recovered alien spacecraft. S4 sits inside the Nevada test site about 15 miles south of Area 51 on the shore of a dry lake bed called Papoose Lake. It's a really fun name to say. Try it. Say it with me. 3, 2, 1. You sound like an idiot. Knapp's first instinct was that he was being told a fantasy. He spent the next 6 weeks listening to the man, and on May 15th, 1989, KLAS aired its first interview with Bob Lazar. But at the time, he gave the name Dennis because his face was blurred and he was trying to maintain anonymity.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
The reason that he had agreed to do the interview at all, he later explained on Billy Goodman's radio show on KVEG, was that he believed his life was in danger.
I made a routine request for my birth certificate, which I needed for just for ID purposes, and I was told that it doesn't exist. I wasn't even born at that hospital. And I kind of got the idea that soon someone was going to disappear.
He wanted a witness in case he disappeared. The blurred Dennis interview ran on a Monday, and after that point, the phones at KLAS did not stop ringing for the next 6 months. Some calls were tips, most were people who'd said they'd seen something at the test site too, and by November, the station had decided to do something that under no other circumstances would they have done it. On November 10th, 1989, with the permission of Bob Lazar, KLAS removed the blur from his face and put his real name on the screen. Lazar later said the unmasking was his idea because he believed the visibility was its own protection. Whoever might have come for him in May, he reasoned, would be less likely to come for him in November after his face was on broadcast television. He'd become a martyr. Bob's not suicidal. Bob's not suicidal. If this was the internet era, that's what people would have been saying. Bob's not suicidal, dude. Bob's not suicidal. You know what I'm going to start saying? I'm suicidal as shit. And if I ever kill myself, I'm going to make it look like I was murdered. I'm going to write a note. I'm going to sign it Hillary Clinton. The man on KVEG that night had a story that physicists in 1989 said was completely impossible. And Knapp's first thought when meeting Bob was that he was a fantasist. His second thought was that everything that Bob Lazar described to him had geographic specificity that no fantasist would risk. What is a fantasist? I'm not exactly sure. Comment down below if you know. I think that's just someone who makes shit up. The first time Bob Lazar said he went to S4 was December of 1988. What's S4? Well, S is a letter, 4 is a number. He said that he was driven from McCarran International Airport to Indian Springs Air Force Base, which is on the Nellis Range, about an hour northwest of Las Vegas.
So I'd go out there, I'd drive out to EG&G Special Projects, which was right in McCarran Airport at that time.
From Indian Springs, he said they put him on a bus with the windows blacked out. The bus drove south, deeper into the test site, toward a place not on any public map.
The bus has the windows blocked out of it.
Lazar described the route to Knapp in detail, from McCarran to Indian Springs by car, then from Indian Springs to the test site by bus. Then the bus to S4 by a specific road that he traced on a map in Knapp's office. The route, well, obviously, was not on any public document. Knapp checked it and the road did exist. It appeared on a topographic map of the Nevada test site that at the time was not widely distributed. The bus drove south towards Papoose Lake, which is the dry alkali flat about 15 miles south of Groom Lake. Groom Lake is what civilians call Area 51. Civilians like you guys. I call it Groom Lake because I'm awesome and I know about aliens. And I also know that Papoose is the lake bed that nobody talks about. Lazar said the bus stopped at the base of a low hill on the western edge of Papoose Lake, and there were hangars built into the side of the hill, 9 of them in a row, with each having a sloped front that matched the angle of the hill it was cut into.
The S4 installation is built into the mountain, and the hangar doors are built on an angle commensurate with the slope of the mountain.
The hangars, he said, had been designed to be invisible from above. A satellite passing over Papoose Lake would just see a hillside.
If you get really close, you can actually see the tracks.
Yeah, well, yeah, we drove right along that.
Yeah.
Like, that's unquestionably where we were.
Inside one of those hangars, he said, was the craft. When the door opened, the craft was already in front of him. Lazar said his job at S4 was reverse engineering, aka taking alien shit and making it human shit. And Lazar's team's task was to figure out how a craft built by something other than humans could produce the propulsion it produced. And I'm gonna need you to produce me some produce. He said he was given binders to read on what the prior teams had concluded, and he said the prior teams had not gotten very far. It looked like a disc, or 2 discs actually, one larger on top and a smaller one set on it like a hat. The whole surface was, in his words, all smooth like it had been a wax casting. No seams, no rivets, no surface, no features at all. Sort of like my scrotum.
You said something about you looked into one and it was all smooth like it had been a wax casting or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It sat on 3 small landing pads that were barely raised off the floor, and the craft had an opening on the underside about 4 feet tall. And there was a single chair in the center, small enough that an adult would have to fold themselves into it. There were no controls on any surface, no screens, no buttons, nothing he recognized as a display. To be clear, he never claimed to have flown the craft. He claimed the craft responded to his presence in some way that he wasn't allowed to describe in detail, or wasn't able to describe in detail. That is the part of the story he's been the most consistent about for 35 years, and least willing to expand upon. The other 8 craft in the row of hangars, he said he was not allowed near.
Now, was that the only one you looked into, or was the other one, was there another one you looked into?
No, it was the only one I looked into.
Huh.
The other ones I just saw from a distance, so I don't know any detail.
An important detail is he said the 9 craft were also completely different in appearance, but he wasn't shown enough of them to say exactly what the differences were. The one that Bob was shown, he called the sports model, and in his telling, was not from this planet.
And the one you looked into, was that the sport model?
Yes, exactly.
And that's the only one you saw fly as well?
Right.
Okay.
Now we get into the part of the story that most physicists in 1989 said was bullshit nonsense. And a lot of physicists now, to be honest, too. But this is also the part where some physicists at the time maybe were wrong a little bit. And Bob Lazar was right, which is really crazy. What Bob Lazar said was that the sport model ran on antimatter. The reactor at the center of the craft, he said, used a small amount of a specific element to generate two effects simultaneously. One was antimatter annihilation, which produced the craft's electrical power, and the other was a gravitational field that surrounded the craft and propagated outward. Lazar was specific about how the gravity worked. He said, "It's not a gravity generator, it's a gravity amplifier." He described the reactor itself as the power source, saying, "The antimatter reactor provides the power for the craft and the basic low-amplitude gravitational wave." What he meant, I think, in his telling was that the craft didn't make gravity. It took something that already existed at the atomic level and just cranked it up. He said the gravity wave existed inside heavier elements and normally stayed inside the atom. The element, apparently, that produced this effect, he said, was atomic number 115. In Lazar's later telling, element 115's strong nuclear force did not behave the way that it did in lighter elements. In lighter atoms, the strong force binds protons and neutrons together inside the nucleus and is just contained there. In 115, he said the field extended past the atom. So the reactor's job was to focus that field, amplify it, and direct it as a gravitational wave. He said that he held a piece of the element and described the piece as a small wedge, heavier than it should have been for its size and warm to the touch. He did not claim, however, the United States had synthesized it, meaning the 115 was found inside the craft, not made by Lazar or anyone that worked with Lazar. It's alien stuff. He said that the S4 program ran on roughly 223 grams of element 115 per craft. He said the total stockpile of element 115 was around 500 pounds. In 1989, when Bob Lazar said this, element 115 did not exist on the periodic table, okay? Very important. The heaviest element that had ever been synthesized at that point was element 106, seaborgium, named after Glenn Seaborg, the chemist who discovered plutonium. Also, huge nerd. Most of the transuranic elements known then had half-lives measured in minutes or less. The idea of an element 9 numbers heavier, let alone one stable enough to sit in your hand and just have 500 pounds of, was, in the consensus of physicists now and then, pretty fringe. And the specific gravity wave mechanism that Lazar described had no theoretical basis in any published physics journal. There was no atomic gravity wave, no strong force generator, no antimatter reactor that could be carried inside a craft 30 feet wide. Physicists who heard Lazar's account in 1989 called it bullshit. They called it impossible. They called it impossible in 1990. They were still calling it impossible in 2000, but in 2003, something kind of changed. Not in Lazar, his story was the same, but in the world that he was describing, something sort of changed. And what is that? Well, we'll get to it. Because everything I've told you so far is what Bob Lazar said in 1989. Now, I have to tell you who Bob Lazar was when he said it, so you get the full idea of where this guy is coming from and why there's such a argument, such a controversial figure this man is. Is he a liar? I don't know. In the 1989 KLAS interviews, Bob Lazar said he had 2 master's degrees.
I have 2 master's degrees. One's in physics, one's in electronics.
He said his bachelor's degree was from Pacifica University, class of 1978, and his master's degrees were from Caltech and MIT. Stanton Friedman was the first guy to fact-check him, kind of a buzzkill. Friedman, you see, was a nuclear physicist who had spent 30 years investigating UFO claims. He'd written a definitive book on Roswell, and he'd walked into the National Archives himself to pull declassified UFO documents. By 1990, he was the most credentialed UFO researcher in the country. By every account, he was willing to credit a story if the credentials supported it. He could not get Lazar's credentials to support anything. He started with Pacifica, and what he found was that the school Bob Lazar said he'd received his physics degree from was, in the year Lazar said he'd received it, the subject of an active federal criminal case. The case was U.S. Magistrate Case number 780271M-01 in the Central District of California. The charge was mail fraud. The basis was that Pacifica University was selling unaccredited degrees to people who had not done the academic work. Basically, the kind of degree that I want, that I'm going to have eventually, one of these days when I finally study enough. Lazar's defense for this was Gene Huff. his closest friend, who explained later that he had taken English and history course at Pacifica because Lazar needed those credits to assemble a degree, having done the science work elsewhere. The defense itself confirmed that Pacifica was being used as a credential laundering pathway. So that's not good. Friedman went to MIT next, and the MIT registrar had no record of anyone named Robert or Bob or Big Dick or Dennis Lazar having ever enrolled, attended, or graduated from the school. There was no thesis on file, no commencement listing, and Friedman wrote after these findings, no such thesis exists at MIT, and he is not on a commencement list, meaning Bob Lazar's thesis did not exist. Bob Lazar never went to MIT. According to MIT, Caltech was the same story. When this was pointed out to Lazar, his answer was that his work at S4 was so classified that the government had retroactively erased everything else about him from the public record. Friedman's response in his published investigation was, the notion that the government wiped his civilian records clean is absurd. Professor Lazar named at Caltech, Bill Duxler, turned out to have actually taught at Pierce Junior College. Pierce confirmed Lazar took electronics courses there, but not Caltech. And Friedman put it this way. He said, quite obviously, if one can go to MIT, one does not go to Pierce. Not to shit on Pierce, but apparently it's not quite as good as MIT. Friedman also pulled Lazar's high school transcript and found him ranked 261 out of 369, meaning he's in the bottom third. Now, all that being said, there is one document in the story that does not behave the way that debunkers say that it does. The Los Alamos National Lab wrote it in 1993. To understand the Los Alamos document, you have to start way back in 1982. On June 27, 1982, the Los Alamos Monitor, the local newspaper of the town where the Los Alamos National Laboratory sits, published a profile of a young engineer who had built a jet-powered Honda, a stainless steel and titanium jet engine on a Honda body burning liquid propane capable of over 200 miles an hour at a dry lake bed near Los Angeles. The byline was Terry England, and the headline was, LA man joins the jet set at 200 miles an hour. And in the body of this article, England identified the young engineer by his name and his employer. He called him a physicist at the Los Alamos Mason Physics Facility. In a 2021 interview, Terry England said that he had taken Lazar's self-described physicist job title at face value and had not fact-checked it. But that phrase was in print in a local newspaper in 1982, 7 years before Bob Lazar went on television and 6 years before he said he started at S4. So it is at minimum evidence that in 1982, Bob Lazar was in some way connected by some form or another to Los Alamos National Laboratory. And a 1982 internal Los Alamos phone directory also lists him by name, Lazar Robert, with the designation K/M next to it. K/M stood for Kirkmeyer, a contractor that supplied technical staff to Los Alamos. But then in 1989, when Stanton Friedman called Los Alamos to verify Lazar's employment claim, Los Alamos said they had no record of him. But by 1989, the Bob Lazar UFO story was also national. So there's conflicting documentation and evidence. They say they have no record of him, but there is record of him. For sure, there, in a phone book. So that's kind of interesting. And George Knapp had a question in regard to that of his own. If Los Alamos was saying there was no record, how did the Los Alamos Monitor describe Lazar as a physicist at the Mason Physics Facility in 1982 with apparent institutional access? So after that question, Knapp wrote to Los Alamos to inquire further. In August of 1993, he got a letter back. The letter was from Diane Benegas, Public Information Specialist at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and she wrote, "We have no personnel records on. Our personnel people tell me we only archive records of Los Alamos employees. That is, those of us who are employed by the University of California." So, Los Alamos did not say Bob Lazar never worked there. They said he was not their employee to keep records on. He was, as the phone directory suggested, a contractor. The Tech 3 positions at Los Alamos in 1982, Benegas wrote, required no 4-year degree, just a 2-year technical certificate or equivalent experience. But they did require a Q clearance, the Department of Energy's top secret clearance for nuclear weapons access. What that means is that in some form or another, the simple debunk collapses under one of the lab's own letters. What it does not mean is that Lazar was a physicist at Los Alamos, though. He was more likely a contractor with clearance, which is its own kind of credible and its own kind of insufficient. Kirkmeyer's records of Bob Lazar have never been produced either. So there's not a lot of information out there. There's not many people in those institutions rushing to Bob Lazar's aid, which honestly makes sense. Now, I mentioned the Q clearance. Lazar has also said separately that he has held 2 clearances. A Q clearance at Los Alamos, which is real and required for the contractor position that he had, but there was no public record of it ever being issued, and for his work at S4, which is a higher clearance he called Majestic, which sounds so cool that it is crazy. No such clearance level exists in any unclassified Department of Energy or Department of Defense documentation. The word Majestic in US UFO history appears in one place, a set of documents called the MJ12 that the FBI determined to be a hoax. You know what else the FBI determined to be a Democratic hoax? The Epstein files. And they also killed Martin Luther King. So I don't know if the FBI is a source of credibility at this point. And also, Stanton Friedman, who called Bob Lazar a fraud, defended the MJ12 documents as authentic for the rest of his life. It's very confusing, to be honest with you, and the more research you do, the less clear it becomes. You kind of just have to pick a side, really. For once, I'm gonna be honest with you. I put a lot of effort into staying on top of my health. I work out, I eat pretty well, and every single day I take a massive stack of supplements. Here's one now. The one thing I've always put off historically is going to the doctor. I just keep saying, I'll do it next week, and then next week becomes 10, 15 years or so. But ZocDoc made it so I couldn't keep dodging it. It's a free app and website that helps you find and book high-quality in-network doctors so you can find someone that you love. Over 150,000 providers across all 50 states, 200 plus specialties. You search for what you need, read verified reviews from real people, see who's available right now, and book instantly. You can do in-person or telehealth video visit, whatever works for you. Most appointments happen fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking, and sometimes even same day. Stop putting off those appointments. Go to zocdoc.com/Oompaville to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's zocdoc.com or zocdoc.com/Oompaville. This video is sponsored by ZocDoc. There's another fact about Bob Lazar that almost nobody talks about, including the people who have been calling him a fraud for 35 years. It's not about UFOs. It is about a woman named Carol. Carol Lazar, Bob Lazar's first wife's maiden name was Nadine Asher. She was Carol Nadine Asher, born in California in the mid-1940s. And in 1975, Carol Asher was charged with second-degree murder in the state of California. She pleaded guilty and served prison time. Court records of the case have not been fully released to the public as of this video being made, to be clear. But what independent researchers have documented is that she was released by late 1977, and that after her release, she took a job at Fairchild Industries, which is a California aerospace manufacturer, as a test technician. Bob also worked at Fairchild, and that is where they met. She was 15 years older than he was, and on July 27th, 1980, in Woodland Hills, California, they got married. She was 3 years past a prison sentence for second-degree murder, and he was 21 years old. By the way, second-degree murder is killing with malice. Basically, you meant to do it, but you didn't think about it for very long. It was not premeditated. First-degree murder is when you plan it out and you kill somebody. So, just for a little clarification there. This little guy has something to say. I am not able to understand the amount of drama that has plagued this man's existence. Bob Lazar, that is. Always with the racism. Hey, I'm not racist! Bro's a straight anti-Semite, too. He starts yapping. I read about mitzvah and lending and all this crazy stuff. It's weird. For 6 years, they were married. Bob Lazar moved through the early 1980s as the Los Alamos Monitor described him. He built the jet car in 1982. The encounter he says he had with Edward Teller, the physicist who fathered the US hydrogen bomb, happened in June of the same year. By the middle of 1982, Bob Lazar's name was on the Los Alamos phone directory as a Kirkmeyer contractor. He was, by every account, a young man building experimental projects on credit and on his own enthusiasm, a pattern that 4 years later would end him in bankruptcy court. Anyways, back to the marriage. Bob Lazar's account of the marriage in later interviews is that Carol was unhappy and that she was ill. There are no contemporaneous public accounts that document either claim, to be fair, but what is in the public record is that by the start of 1986, Bob had started seeing Tracy Ann Merck. And then, on April 19th, 1986, Bob did something. He married Tracy Merck at the We've Only Just Begun wedding chapel in Las Vegas. He was on that date still legally married with his first wife, Carol. That's bigamy. I don't think you can do that unless you're Joseph Smith. 2 days later, on April 26, 1986, Carol Lazar was found dead in the garage of the home that she shared with Bob at 1933 and Greta Street, Las Vegas. And the cause of the death was carbon monoxide poisoning. She had run her car in the closed garage and died from the fumes. The case was referred to the Clark County coroner and given file number 001423-86. No autopsy was ever performed. It was pretty cut and dry. The coroner did note that rigor mortis had already begun to dissipate by the time her body was found. That means that she had been deceased for hours before she was found. Bob Lazar's account of his wife's death in interviews then and since is that Carol was dying of pancreatic cancer and she had taken her own life. But no medical record of a pancreatic cancer diagnosis has ever surfaced. But that's also, private and all that shit. By the way, I'm obviously not implying that Bob Lazar killed his wife or that she was murdered or anything. It is just tragic, dramatic weight to this man's life that can give you either a sense to trust or distrust him. I don't know anybody who's had more crazy shit happen. 3 months after Carol's death on July 21st, 1986, Bob Lazar filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in Las Vegas Federal Bankruptcy Court with case number BK8601623, just in case you want to look it up. The reason cited on the filing for bankruptcy was death of spouse. In the end of October 1986, Bob and Tracy were married a second time, but this time it was legally. So his first wife is now dead, and the bigamous wedding was now a real wedding, and the bankruptcy had erased everything pretty much from before. And that would be one of the craziest things in this entire man's life if her husband hadn't, in the next 4 years, done all this other insane, crazy shit. So, back to 1989. Bob goes on television to tell the world about S4. In 1990, the year after, he's arrested for pandering. The charge was that Bob Lazar had recruited a prostitute named Tony Bullock and was running her business out of an apartment complex on Tamara Street in Las Vegas called Newport Cove. He maintained the computer records, kept the license plate numbers of clients, photographed clients in a waiting room, and took at least 50% of the fees. That is all according to law enforcement. 50%? That's crazy, man. On June 18th, 1990, Bob Lazar pleaded guilty to felony pandering before Judge Jack Lehman of the 8th Judicial District Court of Nevada. On August 20th, 1990, he was sentenced to a 3-year suspended sentence with probation and 150 hours of community service, a ban from brothels, and 1 year of mandatory psychotherapy. And just in case you didn't know, brothels are legal in Nevada. So, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, in its reporting on the case the next day, referred to Bob Lazar as UFO Witness Lazar, which is pretty interesting. It's important to note the Deputy District Attorney John Lukens told the Review-Journal that there were no drugs, nor was there any indication of force or coercion. So he had a pretty above-board sex prostitution ring that he ran out of an apartment complex and took 50% of the fees. I mean, it seems pretty crazy. Initially, one of Bob's defenses was that he was trying to help Tony, the first prostitute, modernize her business by giving it computer systems and stuff like that. But then in the actual case records and everything, it seemed like he kind of started it a little bit. He's kind of like the main guy. That's why they split 50% of the fees. A lot of Bob's supporters heavily imply that all of these things have been massively embellished and exaggerated to discredit him. A lot of people also say that this has nothing to do with aliens or UFOs, so who gives a... And honestly, I get it, all right? Yeah, it does, you know what? The charge was originally aiding and abetting a prostitution ring, but then was reduced to felony pandering, which is like different from pimping. It's you use coercion to create a prostitute that's not like through force or whatever, but it is kind of through force because it's coercive. It's not good either way. It's bad. It's pretty bad. But like people say, it doesn't have a lot to do with UFOs or science or extraterrestrials or anything like that. So Bob later started a chemicals company, the next logical step after a prostitution ring, called United Nuclear Scientific Equipment and Supplies. The company sold restricted chemicals, some of them used in illegal fireworks, by mail order. And in 2003, federal investigators raided United Nuclear's offices and pulled its chemical sales records. In 2006, the company was charged under the Federal Hazardous Substances Act with 3 counts of introducing banned substances into interstate commerce, and in 2007, United Nuclear pleaded guilty. The corporation paid a $7,500 fine and was placed on 3 years of probation. As a part of the plea, the government agreed not to bring personal charges against Bob Lazar or his third wife, Joy White. That's a lot of run-ins with the government. They really seem interested in this guy, to be honest with you. Then on December 22nd, 2015, a 31-year-old woman named Janelle Sturtzel died of thallium poisoning in Houghton, Michigan. The Michigan State Police and the FBI traced the thallium back to United Nuclear's online store. And in 2017, agents arrived at United Nuclear's offices in Michigan. Bob Lazar cooperated, giving investigators voluntary access to the company's computers. He was not a suspect, and the search warrant the agents had brought was not served. In subsequent interviews, Bob Lazar has at times implied that the 2017 visit was government pressure related to what he saw at S4. The Bob Lazar story is at minimum a story about what people will believe when nobody's flipping over the package to read the ingredients. Speaking of which, are our sour gummies. 37% less sugar than Sour Patch Kids, 0 numbered dyes, and real fruit purees, concentrated juices. The other guys use numbered dyes like Red 40. You might as well be putting thallium in that shit. Just kidding. That's a horrible joke to make, but I don't really care that much. They also don't have fruit in theirs. Go to sour.gg, don't buy corporate slop, support the little guys, and use code OOMPA to get 10% off, by the way. We've released almost 100 different flavors and have dozens on our site right now. So thank you to me for sponsoring this video. Remember the fellow we talked about earlier in the video, a fellow by the name of Stanton Friedman, who didn't really like Bob Lazar and said that he was a fraud? He died in May of 2019. Before that, for nearly 50 years, he was the most relentless investigator of UFO claims working in the United States of America. He had a master's in nuclear physics from the University of Chicago, and he'd worked on classified nuclear aircraft propulsion programs for General Electric, Aerojet General, and Westinghouse in the 1950s and the 60s. This guy was at ground zero. All right. He spent the rest of his life walking into archives and registrars' offices and field-checking claims. He believed the 1947 Roswell incident was completely real, and he believed the United States government had recovered alien craft. But he could not find a way to believe Bob Lazar. He published his investigation in International UFO Reporter. The article was titled, "The Bob Lazar Fraud," and that title and the position it stated, he had never walked back. Friedman's load-bearing sentence on Lazar, the one quoted in every subsequent investigation of the man, was, "Scientists leave trails. Lazar is not a scientist." So what does that mean to the layman? Well, luckily Stanton elaborated. He has no published papers, no co-authors, no thesis committee, no qualifying exams. There's not many lone wolf scientists. Friedman investigated Lazar in person. He visited MIT, he visited Caltech, he pulled Lazar's old high school transcripts at Westbury, Long Island. He drove to Pierce Junior College in Los Angeles, confirmed the only post-secondary attendance Lazar's paper trail could substantiate. He actually put in the work, and his conclusion was that Bob Lazar was a complete fraud. Now, Stanton isn't just this guy who hates UFOs, though. He thinks Roswell was legit. I wish this guy would be able to see what they got now. Oh, by the way, also, this UFO disclosure thing that's been going on recently, honestly, release the Epstein files. Finish with that first. But it's pretty exciting. I want to see more. So far, everything we've seen is the same shit we've been seeing for the last couple years. There has been absolutely nothing new, even remotely interesting. It all just looks like the same old bullshit or weather balloons. And show me some aliens, dude. Show me some stuff. I want to see the real shit, man. Nothing would make me believe Bob Lazar more than if it was just real. And by the way, I do believe Bob Lazar, by the way, just so you guys are wondering. There's like a big part of my I want to believe Bob Lazar. It's kind of like Bigfoot for me. There's not a lot of evidence, but like the stories are interesting and they've stayed the same. So there's like it said, you can put a level of trust in it, but you can't bet your life on it, you know? Or maybe you can. A lot of people can. A lot of people are gonna be really mad at me that I made this video, unfortunately, but I'm one of you guys. I'm one of you idiots. I'm a fellow idiot, all right? I promise to you. But in order to be a real idiot, you also have to acknowledge the facts. And then still decide in the face of the facts and the knowledge and the information that you are going to continue being an idiot. Like a me. Anyways, back to Stanton Friedman. There's one detail that matters more than any of the rest. In 1984, Friedman, William Moore, and Jamie Shandera helped surface a set of documents called the Majestic 12 Papers, or MJ12. The documents purported to be Truman-era briefings on a classified U.S. government program that recovered crashed alien aircraft. The FBI examined the documents and labeled them completely bogus. Philip Klass, a skeptic and aviation journalist, demonstrated that the Harry Truman signature on the documents had been photocopied from an unrelated 1947 memo. Stanton Friedman defended the MJ12 documents as authentic for the next 35 years. He died on that hill, literally. He published a book on them and defended them at conferences. He never recanted. And that is the man who called Bob Lazar a fraud. The most credentialed UFO researcher in the country believed the documents the FBI called a hoax, but rejected the live human witness who described S4. And a lot of what Bob Lazar has said about S4 is also coming true, or at least aspects of it. One of the biggest points to Bob not being a fraud and being an honest man, and one of the things that I really attached to be honest, is the consistency of his storytelling. Over the last 35 years, Bob has told his story. For the first time, he told it on KLAS in May of 1989. He's told it again and again in public, roughly every year since. He told the story on Larry King Now in 2019. He told it in Jeremy Corbell's 2018 Netflix documentary called Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers. He told it on Joe Rogan in June of 2019, which is the most viewed episode of Joe Rogan's podcast of all time. It has over 60 million views. And he told it again on Joe Rogan last month, in which they announced a new show that I watched. And honestly, the dude did a lot of really cool art and stuff. He did it all in Blender, and it was really fun to watch, and it was a great piece of media. And they released some new stuff in that. That's pretty interesting and pretty compelling. Regardless, in every retelling, the load-bearing details are the same. S4 was a hangar in the desert southwest of Groom Lake, built into the side of a hill on Papoose Lake, and with the most recent documentary that they released, they went into more detail as to that being an actual verified fact. There's a video of this guy flying, Googled flying, and you can see the thing. I don't know if I'm allowed to use literal footage from the documentary in this video, without getting sued because it's so recent, but I tried to find the evidence online and I couldn't. Bob has also consistently said the craft that he was allowed to enter was called the Sport Model. It ran on element 115. The reactor at its center amplified a gravitational field that already existed inside the atom. He held a piece of the element. He met Edward Teller in 1982. His S4 work began in December of 1988 and ended on April 7th, 1989. He was debriefed at Indian Springs. Names of the programs that he describes: Project Galileo, Project Sigma. They do not change. The interior dimensions of the Sport Model do not change. The position of the chair, the shape of the doorway, the kid size scale, the interior, the wax cast surface texture, none of it changes. Fabricated stories, in my experience, from what I know, they tend to drift. Maybe Bob's just a better fabricator because his story doesn't really drift. Obviously, it's possible for someone to lie in the exact same way for 35 years. For sure. It's happened a lot, probably. I mean, look at just the government. It's pretty consistent there. The consistency itself does not prove that Lazar was at S4. A career-long con artist could have discipline and could maintain the same story for 35 years. The consistency, though, does prove that whatever Lazar believes happened to him, he is not just making it up as he goes along. He made it all up once and has been telling and retelling that same story with the same details to dozens of interviewers across 4 decades. 21-year-old narrator who said this in 1989 and the 65-year-old man who says it on Joe Rogan in 2026, they're just saying the same shit. And that's not nothing. It's also not proof, obviously. It is an indissolvable fact about Bob Lazar. Oh, and also element 115, by the way. Remember how that didn't exist at the time of Bob announcing it? In 1989, what Bob Lazar said about element 115 was, in the consensus of physicists, complete and total nonsense. But in August of 2003, a team at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research at Dubna, Russia, working with Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California, synthesized atomic number 115 for the first time. The result was confirmed independently a decade later by the GSI Helmholtz Center in Darmstadt, Germany, and Lund University in Sweden in 2013. Element 115 exists, and it now has a name. Element 115 is called moscovium, chemical symbol MC, named for the Moscow Oblast where the JINR sits. Now, where it differs from what Bob Lazar said is that the isotopes that have been synthesized so far have half-lives of milliseconds. The longest-lived isotope, moscovium-290, has a half-life of about 650 milliseconds. These half-lives are far shorter than what Bob Lazar described. What Bob Lazar described was an isotope of 115 that was stable enough to hold in his hand across a desk for hours and not kill him or blow up or explode, but rather be used in ancient alien technology. No documented isotope of moscovium synthesized to date has had that kind of stability. However, there is a published theoretical model called the Island of Stability, which predicts that certain heavier isotopes of certain transuranic elements, including 115, should be substantially more stable than the isotopes that have been synthesized so far. Specifically, isotope 291 of moscovium, which has not been synthesized, is theoretically predicted to have a half-life on the order of seconds, which is longer than milliseconds, if you didn't know. That is still not stable in your hands for hours, but it is a category of stability that back in 1989, the physicists who heard Lazar, they called that impossible. The category is no longer impossible. It is in the open peer-reviewed literature, and it is obviously debated, but it's out there. So that obviously does not vindicate Bob Lazar. But also, 115 was never synthesized then, and now it has been, and it's getting closer and closer. The macroscopic quantity claim he made is still scientifically unsupported, and I would know, because I'm a scientist. Now, how about what the United States Senate did in 2023? Also doesn't vindicate Bob Lazar, but it is more interesting than the situation of the government in the 1990s and 80s specifically. On December 16th, 2017, the New York Times ran a front page story by Helen Cooper, Ralph Blumenthal, and Leslie Keane. The story was titled Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's mysterious UFO program. The program was called AATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. It had existed since 2008, and the Times confirmed that the United States Department of Defense had been running a classified program to study unidentified aerial phenomena for 9 years that the public had not known about. On April 27, 2020, the Department of Defense officially released 3 videos shot from a U.S. Navy aircraft, FLIR 1, Gimbal, and Go Fast, showing unidentified objects performing maneuvers that the Department of Defense had not been able to explain. In July of 2022, the department established AARO, or AARO, or the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, to consolidate the government's UAP investigations. On July 26, 2023, a former Air Force intelligence officer named David Grush testified under oath before a House Oversight Committee, and he said, "I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program to which I was denied access." End quote. Hey Bob, that sounds pretty familiar. In March of 2024, AARO published its Historical Record Report Volume 1. The report's headline finding was that AARO had located no empirical evidence of off-world spacecraft or recovered extraterrestrial remains. So the government says, we investigated and we didn't find anything. But in 2023, the U.S. Senate took up an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the annual military funding bill, and the amendment was Senate Amendment 797. The lead co-sponsor was Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. The amendment was modeled on the JFK Assassinations Records Collection Act, and its original provision authorized federal eminent domain over recovered UAP technologies and biological evidence held by private contractors. The Senate Majority Leader of the United States co-authored a bill whose plain legislative text presumed that recovered non-human craft and biological evidence existed and were held by private contractors. This is crazy, because this is what the conspiracy crazy people have been saying since Truman. All right, guys, ever heard of Bourne Secret? How about the Department of Energy? How about Skunk Works? Anyways, this eminent domain provision was killed in conference, and a reduced version of the amendment passed. Both halves of that sentence matter, though. Once again, doesn't vindicate Bob Lazar, even remotely, okay? But it is really interesting. And what has changed is not what we know about S4. What has changed is what it costs us as a culture to consider the question of whether or not it's even possible that we're reverse engineering craft that is not from this Earth or planet or wherever the it's from. In 1989, the question of whether the US government had recovered alien craft was the province of TV whistleblowers and ufologists. Insane crackpots. The craziest of the crazy people from history, American history, the classics. You believe that fucking the government shot Kennedy and they killed MLK and that there's aliens? Literally every single one of those conspiracies that has been a conspiracy for the last 80 years, they're all true now. They're just all true. So is it really that crazy to believe Bob Lazar? Is it really that crazy when we're witnessing in real time a massive cover-up that dwarfs Watergate in regard to the Epstein files? The president's wife doesn't even believe that there's no co-conspirators. It's not that crazy to question these things. And it's not that crazy to believe that this guy worked at these places and was reverse engineering aircraft, because crazier shit has been covered up that's just plain and obvious in the open. The cult of Bob Lazar in 1989 is not the cult of Bob Lazar in 2026. The cult of Bob Lazar in 2026 is a lot more rational and is a lot more supported by empirical evidence and disclosure and transparency, which is pretty crazy. The story has stayed the exact same in spite of everything. And the world around that story has kind of, in a sense, gotten a little bit more on the side of it being true. That is what allows me to even posit the possibility. I want it to be real, I really do. I also don't want them to cover anything else up. I want them to release all the JFK files. I want them to release all the MLK files. I want them to release all the Epstein files. And yeah, I think they're all evil, pretty much. To be clear, I am naturally fairly biased. I have a signed drawing of the sport model on the wall in my office. It was drawn and signed by Bob Lazar. I bought it from his website like in 2018 or 2019 or something along those lines. So when making this video, in spite of my natural inherent bias, I tried to be unbiased and cover as much as I possibly could and try to make as much sense as I possibly can. I don't know if Bob Lazar is lying, but I do for sure know that the government's lying about a lot of stuff. So I guess you can just kind of pick what truth you want to subscribe to. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, press the like button, join the Gump Club for uncensored footage, and also I'm in the Gump server pretty frequently, so see you guys soon.